I hope this verdict teaches you your place. That's what Ethan Ward heard as he stepped out into the Denver snow, the words of a smug relative echoing behind him the moment he lost everything his adoptive father left behind. 3 hours later, he stood alone in a freezing alley, holding a single silver coin pressed into his palm like a message from the grave. The initials carved along its edge pointed to a hidden valley no one wanted him to reach. And someone was already trying to stop him. He wasn't meant to fight back. But men like Ethan don't disappear quietly. Before we begin, tell me what time you're listening and where you're watching from. Drop a comment below, share this story with someone who needs a little strength today, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful tales every day. Winter judgment in Denver. Snow swept across Denver in slow, heavy drifts that softened the edges of the world. Ethan Ward stepped out of the courthouse, the cold catching on the dark stubble along his jaw. At 40, he carried the solid frame of a man shaped by years of service, shoulders broad beneath a navy winter coat, worn thin at the elbows. A faint stiffness pulled at his left leg each time he moved, a quiet reminder of a battlefield injury that had never fully healed. His eyes, a deep brown darkened by fatigue rather than age, scanned the steps ahead with the wary calm of someone who had seen more violence than comfort. Beside him walked Ranger, a 5-year-old German shepherd with a black and tan coat that caught the falling snow like scattered ash. Ranger's amber eyes flicked alertly from stranger to stranger. His harness, marked Service Dog, Do Not Pet, hugged his muscular frame. And though he walked without sound, there was a gravity to him, the kind that made people instinctively step aside. He was trained for chaos, yet in this moment, he seemed to sense that the battlefield had shifted into something far quieter and far more personal. Ethan paused at the bottom of the marble steps. His breath ghosted into the air, slow and heavy. His hearing still echoed with the gavel's final strike, a sound that had cut deeper than he'd expected. Losing a legal fight was nothing compared to the things he had lost on foreign soil, but today felt different. Today felt like betrayal delivered under fluorescent lights. Inside that courtroom, chilly, wood-paneled, and painfully orderly, he had sat across from Jonathan Hale, his father's Deason. Jonathan was a tall man in his late 50s, with thinning blonde hair combed too carefully over a shine of scalp. He wore a charcoal coat and a silk tie that seemed too fine for a family dispute, and his pale blue eyes never warmed even when he smiled. Jonathan's life had been spent in investment offices and pristine homes, untouched by hardship. He spoke with the confidence of someone who believed struggle belonged only to other men. His attorney, Mark Rowell, had sat beside him. Mark was lean, sharp-featured, with a pointed nose and a clipped mustache that matched the severe part in his hair. He spoke crisply and without hesitation, each word honed to win. Ethan suspected Mark had never spent a single day fighting for anything except billable hours. They had torn apart his claim to the family land with the ease of men who had prepared their battlefield in advance. Then came the will. When the executor, a short, soft-spoken woman named Helen Price, with silver hair pinned neatly and spectacles perched low on her nose, opened the velvet box, the room had shifted. Helen was the kind of person whose kindness lived in the corners of her face. Yet even she hesitated when she lifted the lid and displayed the lone silver dollar resting inside. A ripple of laughter spread among the Sioux relatives. Ethan didn't look at them. He looked only at Helen, who cleared her throat and read softly, "To my son in all but blood, Ethan Ward, I leave this coin. One day, he will need it more than he knows." It wasn't the coin that hurt. It was the memory of the man who left it. Samuel Ward, a former firefighter with a beard peppered gray, a warm steadiness to his presence, and a voice roughened by smoke and long nights of service. Samuel had taken Ethan in when he returned from deployment hollowed out and brittle. He'd offered work, a home, and a place to breathe. Samuel had been the kind of father who didn't raise his voice because he never needed to. His respect was quiet, but firm enough to anchor lost men. Losing Samuel had been hard, but losing the meaning behind his last decision felt worse. Now, outside the courthouse, Ethan opened his gloved hand and looked at the coin again. Its edges were worn smooth, the engraving faint. Nothing about it looked valuable. Nothing about today felt salvageable. Ranger brushed his shoulder against Ethan's leg, a solid weight grounding him the way he had countless times during panic attacks, nightmares, and long nights spent remembering. The dog lifted his head and gave one short, sharp bark, alert, insistent, not loud, but full of purpose. "Easy, boy. Ethan murmured, though his voice wavered. He searched the street as snow collected on his coat. Cars crawled along the boulevard. People hurried past without meeting his eyes. Life moved on, indifferent. But Ethan couldn't. A future he didn't understand had just closed behind him with a judge's signature. Another one, equally unclear, waited somewhere ahead. Denver's winter wind cut through him, its coldness almost cleansing, almost cruel. He clenched the coin in his fist until the metal bit into his palm. Ranger sat beside him, ears turned forward, watching him, waiting for a direction that Ethan himself didn't yet know. The dog barked again, softer this time. A question, a reminder. Ethan exhaled, the breath shaking. He had no land, no inheritance, no path forward, just a loyal dog, a single tarnished coin, and a sky full of snow that refused to stop falling. And for the first time in years, he did not know where to go next. The clue in the coin and the pursuit in the snow night settled over Denver with a hush that felt almost unnatural, as if the snow itself had smothered every familiar sound. Ethan Ward pushed open the door to his temporary rental room, the hinges groaning in complaint. The small apartment carried the faint scent of old carpet and cold radiator pipes, a place meant for passing through rather than staying. Ranger padded in behind him, shaking powdery snow from his black and tan coat, each flake catching the dim yellow light and melting into dark fur. Ethan pulled off his gloves and sat at the small wooden table near the window. Outside, the street lamps cast long amber streaks across the snowdrifts. The silence in the room pressed in, thick enough to feel. His fingers closed around the silver coin, cool and deceptively simple in his palm. He lifted it toward the light. Along the beveled rim, half hidden under years of wear, were two carved letters, W.H. He frowned, his jaw tightening, as memory flickered. Samuel had never spoken of anything abbreviated that way. But Samuel had carried secrets the way other men carried tools, quietly, with purpose, and only revealed when needed. Ranger stepped closer, resting his chin briefly on Ethan's knee. The dog's amber eyes watched the coin, as if he too understood its weight. Before Ethan could ponder further, his phone vibrated. A single notification glowed on the cracked screen. Unknown number, go to Winter Hollow, don't let anyone follow you. A cold prickle crawled along Ethan's spine. He had spent years learning to trust instincts that whispered danger long before danger showed itself. Now those instincts flared like a match in the dark. He looked at Ranger. The dog's ears had already lifted, alert, tense. Ethan pocketed the coin and stood. "Come on, buddy. We're not staying here tonight." Ranger responded with a low rumble of agreement. They moved quickly. Ethan gathered only essential items, a worn map, a flashlight with fading batteries, and a small duffel stitched with his old SEAL insignia. Ranger stood at the door, muscles tight beneath his harness, gaze fixed on the hallway as though expecting trouble. He wasn't wrong. The moment they stepped out into the icy parking lot, Ethan felt it, a presence subtle yet unmistakable. He had known enough hostile streets abroad to read the air. Something shifted here now, something watching. His breath fogged as he unlocked his old blue pickup. The engine coughed alive with a reluctant roar. Ranger hopped into the passenger seat, posture alert. Ethan pulled out of the lot, tires crunching over ice. At the third intersection, high beams erupted behind them. A black SUV. It followed too closely, too deliberately. Ethan's hands tightened on the wheel. The SUV accelerated. Ranger growled, a deep vibrating sound that seemed to fill the cab. "All right," Ethan muttered. "Message received." He turned, sharply onto a narrow residential road layered in untouched snow. The SUV followed, skidding slightly, but refusing to lose pace. Ethan's pulse steadied instead of racing, a strange calm learned only in the worst moments of war. He had been hunted before. He knew the rhythm of pursuit. He jerked the wheel toward a side road leading into the foothills. The truck fishtailed, rear tires sliding across packed ice, but Ethan controlled the skid with practiced precision. Ranger braced himself, shifting weight exactly as he had during transport runs overseas. The SUV tried to match the maneuver, its tires spinning wildly for a moment. Ethan pushed the truck harder. Snow-laden pines rose on either side of the winding road, the forest swallowing light. The only sounds were the grinding engine and Ranger's steady breathing. But the SUV reappeared, closing in. Ethan spotted a fork ahead, one path plowed, the other buried under heavy drifts, nearly invisible. He took the unplowed route. The truck jolted violently as it met uneven ground, bouncing hard enough that Ranger dug his claws into the seat for balance. Snow shot up around them in blinding sprays. Branches scraped the sides of the vehicle like skeletal hands. The SUV hesitated at the fork, brake lights flaring red. Then it continued down the plowed road, choosing not to risk the deep drifts. Ethan exhaled shakily. Looks like they don't want to get their tires dirty. But relief didn't reach him fully. He knew enough to recognize restraint when he saw it. Whoever followed him wasn't reckless. They were patient. He drove deeper until the road disappeared completely beneath Winter's weight. Finally, he pulled over and cut the engine. The sudden silence rang in his ears. Ranger leapt down into the snow, turning circles, his nose to the wind. Then he stiffened. A single warning bark split the night. Ethan froze. Snowflakes landed on his lashes as he listened. Footsteps, slow, heavy, human, coming from the trees behind them. Someone had followed on foot. Ranger moved in front of Ethan, hackles raised, head low, eyes burning with protective instinct. Ethan crouched beside him, scanning the tree line with soldier-trained eyes. The footsteps stopped. The darkness listened back. Ethan's breath fogged in the still air as a single truth settled over him. Someone knew about Winter Hollow. Someone wanted to stop him from reaching it. And now, in the frozen quiet of the Denver foothills, Ethan understood that the coin in his pocket was far more dangerous than he had imagined. The frozen valley and the legacy of a father, Winter Hollow, appeared out of the storm like a memory half buried beneath ice. Snow swept across the ridgeline, the wind howling through skeletal pines as Ethan Ward guided the battered pickup along the narrow mountain path. Ranger stood with his front paws braced on the dashboard, ears forward, amber eyes scanning the drifting white curtain ahead. The dog seemed energized despite the long journey, his breath fogging the glass in sharp, steady bursts. When the valley finally opened below them, a bowl of frost-lit land ringed by dark mountains, Ethan felt something shift inside his chest. A sense of recognition, though he had never once stepped foot here. It felt like a place built from the pieces of things Samuel had loved. Quiet, resilience, community, winter, mountains that refused to bow. At the foot of the entrance stood an old iron gate, its bars carved with markings weathered by decades of blizzard winds. A metal column rose beside it, fitted with a thin rectangular slit. Ethan removed the silver coin from his coat. Ranger watched closely, ears twitching. "Let's see what secrets you've been hiding," Ethan murmured. He slid the coin into the slot. A faint hum pulsed through the air. The runic shapes along the gate flickered with a dim blue light. Then, quietly, smoothly, the iron panels swung inward. Snow lifted around them in drifting spirals, as if stirred by unseen hands. Ranger gave a short, approving bark. Inside the valley lay a cluster of warmly lit cabins, built from thick logs darkened by age. Smoke rose from stone chimneys. Wind turbines creaked lazily atop high posts. Storage buildings stood half-buried in snowbanks, roofs reinforced with steel beams. It wasn't a large community, but it was prepared, thoughtful, defended. Ethan drove slowly until he reached a wide clearing. There, standing on the porch of the central lodge, was Miriam Holt. She was a tall woman in her early 60s, with a straight posture that hinted at a life spent giving orders rather than taking them. Her silver hair was braided tightly down her back, revealing a face lined with both harsh Montana winters and the weight of leadership. Her eyes, sharp gray with flecks of pale blue, watched Ethan with a mixture of recognition and careful calculation. She wore a thick wool coat the color of forest bark, and heavy boots dusted in frost. When Ethan stepped out of the truck, she descended the porch steps with a steadiness suggesting she could cross ice without ever slipping. "You're Samuel Ward's boy," Miriam said, her voice low, edged with an accent shaped by decades in the mountains. "You have his shoulders, and the same stubborn frown, God help us." Ethan blinked. "You knew him well? Well enough to know he never brought someone here unless he believed they belonged." She nodded toward Ranger, who stood tall beside Ethan. "And that must be Ranger. Samuel wrote about him in letters, said the dog had more sense than half the men he'd served with." Ranger wagged his tail once, politely. Miriam's stern expression softened only slightly. "Come inside. There's something you need to see." The interior of the lodge was warmer than Ethan expected. Lanterns cast golden light across shelves lined with tools, maps, and photographs of the valley. On the far wall hung a framed picture of Samuel Ward, broad-shouldered, beard graying, smiling with the tired warmth of a man who had survived too much yet still believed in the worth of things. Ethan swallowed hard. Miriam led him into an adjoining room, the very one Samuel had once lived in. The space was modest, a sturdy bed, a wooden desk cluttered with old papers, and a thick rug woven with mountain patterns. But the desk drew Ethan's attention immediately. Spread across its surface were blueprints, diagrams, and hand-drawn maps. The top document caught his eye, a detailed layout of a defensive perimeter, including motion sensors, thermal beacons, and automated alerts tied to the valley's power grid. He pulled another sheet closer. North Star Mining, Asset Acquisition Proposal, underlined 3 times. Miriam's jaw tensed. Samuel tried to stop them. North Star wants this valley, and they don't intend to buy it fairly. Titan deposits under these mountains are rare and worth a fortune. They tried coming after him? Ethan asked quietly. She nodded. More than once. He never said the details, but I saw the bruises, saw the fear in the younger ones when strangers came asking questions. He built much of this system himself to keep us safe. Ethan let the weight of it press into him. His father, his anchor, had been living a battle of his own, one Ethan had never known about. Ranger moved slowly across the room, sniffing the corners, tail stiff. He stopped suddenly in front of a wooden panel near the floor, his ears flattened. A low, uneasy growl rumbled from his chest. Ethan knelt and pressed his hand to the board. It shifted under his touch. There's a compartment, Ethan said. Miriam's expression darkened. Samuel never mentioned one? Ethan pulled the panel open. Cold, stale air drifted out from the hidden space. Inside was a narrow ladder leading downward into a dimly lit chamber. The scent of machine oil, old metal, and something sharper, chemical, almost sulfuric, rose from below. Ranger growled again, louder this time. Someone had been here recently. Ethan descended the ladder, boots hitting concrete. The chamber held shelves of old tools, generators, sealed crates with faded military markings, and a metal workbench covered in black smudges. A smear of grease, residue from blasting compound, footprints in the dust. Someone had broken in and tampered with equipment. Someone with skill, someone quiet. Someone who did not want Ethan here. He looked back up at Miriam, who waited at the top of the ladder, her face drawn tight with worry. Whatever Samuel was fighting, Ethan said, it didn't end with him. Ranger's bark echoed through the chamber, sharp and urgent. The danger had already found them. The sabotage in the mountain night and the soldier's choice snow hammered the valley in restless waves by the time darkness settled fully over Winter Hollow. The storm carried a hard, metallic edge, the kind that carved through layers of clothing and burned along exposed skin. Ethan Ward stood outside Samuel's old cabin with Ranger at his side, watching the sky churn. The dog's breath misted in short, steady bursts, his posture stiff, his instincts on high alert. Then the alarm shattered the night. A sharp, pulsing wail rose from the northern ridge, an alarm loud enough to cut through wind, loud enough to mean only one thing. Breach. Ethan didn't hesitate. Go, Ranger! They moved in sync, old training returning like muscle memory. Ethan sprinted through shin-deep snow, despite the protest in his injured knee, while Ranger bounded ahead with a fluid, powerful grace. Their shadows leapt across the white ground under the sweeping beams of the rotating tower light. The entrance to the northern engine bunker was half buried beneath a dune of snow. Its metal door hung crooked on its hinge. Inside, sparks flickered in the dark like dying fireflies. The thermal generator, Winter Hollow's heart, was torn open. Ranger stopped short and lowered his head, scanning. Ethan crouched beside the mutilated machine. Heavy cables had been sliced cleanly. The cuts were precise, controlled, deliberate, not the work of vandals or amateurs. This was someone trained, someone like him. Footsteps cracked in the snow above the bunker. Ranger snapped his head up, emitting 2 sharp barks before launching up the slope. Ranger, wait! Ethan pushed himself upright and followed, boots slipping on the icy incline. The storm surged around him, snow whipping sideways in violent bursts. Ranger carved a clear path, body low, tail straight, ears pinned forward. A figure appeared at the crest, nothing more than a black silhouette against a wall of white. The person moved with a soldier's confidence, fast but controlled, leaving deep, angular prints in the snow. Ranger lunged. The stranger hurled a flare downward. A violent burst of red light swallowed the slope, blinding Ethan. He shielded his eyes as snow flared scarlet around him. Ranger dodged the flare's direct path but slid on a sheet of hidden ice. His paws scrambled for traction, claws scraping wildly. For one terrible moment, the dog's hind legs dipped toward the narrow ravine lying just below. "Ranger!" Ethan dropped to his stomach, grabbing Ranger's harness with both hands. His injured knee screamed as he braced himself, dragging the dog back from the edge. Ranger scrambled upright, leaning briefly into Ethan's chest before whipping his head toward the fleeing saboteur. The figure was already retreating into the storm. Ethan forced himself up and pursued. They followed the trail past an outcrop of stone and into the thick stand of pines. Snow absorbed sound, but not smell. Ranger's nose tracked the sharp scent of diesel and machine oil, almost identical to the odor in Samuel's hidden bunker. This wasn't random. This was connected. He reached a clearing where the footprints ended abruptly. Whoever the saboteur was, they knew how to disappear. The storm rushed in, erasing prints, swallowing their path. Ranger circled once, then barked sharply at a single boot print preserved beneath a tree root. Ethan dropped to one knee. The impression was large, deeply pressed, the tread pattern military grade, not a local, not a drifter, someone paid, someone prepared. Ethan rose slowly, breath shaking in cold air. By the time he and Ranger returned to the lodge, Miriam Holt was waiting on the porch. Snow clung to her braid, and her normally calm features were drawn tight. What happened? Ethan told her everything. She listened with her jaw clenched, arms folded, as though bracing herself against more than just the wind. Inside, she lit another lantern. Its glow deepened the lines on her tired face. "We knew North Star Mining wouldn't give up," she said quietly. "But this?" She gestured toward Ethan's frost-covered coat. "This was an attack." Ethan stepped to the long wooden table and placed the silver coin on its surface. It gleamed faintly in the lantern light. He had thought about that coin since the moment he left Denver, and the truth of it pressed deeper now. Samuel hadn't left him money. He had left him responsibility. Miriam sat opposite him. "You understand what he was trying to protect," Ethan nodded. "Winter Hollow. And now?" Her voice softened, but held gravity. "What will you do with that knowledge?" He felt Ranger's warm weight settle against his leg. The dog rested his head there, steady as ever. Outside, the storm screamed against the walls, a reminder that the valley existed in a world that did not care if it survived. But Ethan cared. He had failed a lot of things in his life. Missions that went wrong, brothers he couldn't save, promises swallowed by war. But the coin in front of him was Samuel's last belief in him. If he walked away, Winter Hollow would fall. If he stayed, he risked everything. The echo of Ranger's earlier bark drifted through Ethan's mind, sharp, insistent, resolute. He picked up the coin and closed his fist around it. "My choice is made," he said. Ranger let out a single decisive bark, as if sealing the vow. And in the storm-lashed heart of Winter Hollow, Ethan Ward found the mission he didn't know he'd been searching for. The final storm and the road ahead. Morning arrived as a muted glow behind the storm clouds, a pale band of light struggling to break through the swirling gray sky. Snow coated every cabin roof, every fence post, every pine needle. The world felt suspended, quiet yet tense, as if waiting for Winter Hollow to decide its own fate. Ethan Ward tightened the straps of his utility vest, the cold biting against his fingertips. Ranger stood beside him, tail lowered but steady, nose twitching at the scents carried by the wind. The dog's breath fogged in rhythmic bursts, his posture alert and serious. Today there were no shadows to chase, only danger to uncover. "Everyone ready?" Ethan asked. 3 members of the defense team stepped forward. Caleb Morton, a burly man in his early 50s with a thick salt and pepper beard and deep-set eyes, adjusted the fur hood of his parka. Caleb had once been a logger before an accident stole the strength of his right shoulder. Though he carried a slight stiffness when he moved, he had gained an iron patience. Slow to speak, slow to anger, but loyal to a fault. Beside him stood Sarah Venn, a tall, lean woman in her late 30s, with auburn hair braided tightly down her back. She had a narrow face, olive skin reddened by cold, and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. Former wilderness rescue, she carried herself with quiet authority and a stubborn streak, earned from years saving people who didn't want saving. The last member, Luke Renner, barely 30, was wiry and nervous, with sandy blonde hair curling from beneath his beanie. His freckled face still held something boyish despite the dark circles beneath his eyes. Luke had once worked for North Star Mining as a junior technician until he witnessed the company's brutality firsthand during a land dispute. The guilt from standing by had aged him more than time ever could. Ethan gave them each a nod. "Let's move." They made their way toward the northern bunker, the path nearly erased by fresh snowfall. The wind cut hard across their faces, carrying the metallic tang of storm-wet steel. Ranger trotted ahead, ears pricked, digging through drifts with practiced precision. Inside the bunker, the temperature dropped sharply. Frost clung to the generator panels like pale vines. The repairs Ethan had made the previous night were intact, but something else wasn't. Ranger froze. Then he barked, one sharp, commanding sound. Ethan knelt beside him. "What is it, boy?" Ranger dug rapidly at a mound of snow near the ventilation shaft. His paws struck metal with a dull clang. Luke cursed under his breath. That's a casing." A rectangular device emerged from the snowbank, dark gray, wires tucked beneath a frost-coated shell. A timed explosive. Ethan's pulse steadied into combat focus. "How long?" Caleb leaned in, squinting. 30 minutes, maybe less. Whoever planted it expected us to be too late. Farazam's jaw tightened. Then let's not be. Working fast but methodically, Ethan exposed the wiring beneath the casing. Ranger remained at his side, unmoving except for the small tremor of anticipation flowing through his muscles. The dog had diffused as many dangers as Ethan: minefields, tripwires, pressure plates. He knew when silence mattered. Ethan located the trigger wire and severed it cleanly. The countdown stopped. He exhaled. "Clear, let's go." No sooner had the team stepped back toward the tunnel exit than the storm let out a violent crack. A section of the ice-covered roof groaned, bowing downward. Ethan grabbed Sarah's arm while Caleb yanked Luke forward. "Move!" They sprinted out of the bunker as the roof gave way behind them, a deafening collapse of ice and steel. Snow plumed into the sky. Ranger leapt clear of the blast radius in a spray of white powder. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Sarah lifted her head and looked Ethan square in the eyes. "Somebody wanted us buried, and they would have gotten it," Caleb muttered, "if not for that dog." Ranger wagged his tail once, modest as always. Back at the lodge, Miriam Holt was waiting. Her silver braid was dusted with frost, and her hands trembled ever so slightly when Ethan placed the disabled device on the table. "It's North Star," Ethan said. "The cuts, the wiring, the timer, it all lines up." Luke stepped forward, voice unsteady. "I know that signature. They use similar devices when they forced families out of their land claims up north." Shame swept across his freckled face. "I didn't speak up then, but I will now." Ethan placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Then help us finish this." By midday, evidence had been gathered: thermal camera footage, boot prints, tampered wiring, and the explosive casing. Ethan compiled everything, wrote a detailed report, and sent it all through Miriam's secure satellite link to federal authorities. The storm raged on. So did the truth. Within days, investigators arrived. North Star Mining was placed under federal review. Arrests were made quietly, efficiently. The saboteurs, once protected by corporate power, were handcuffed without ceremony. Winter Hollow breathed again. 1 month later, under a gentler winter sky, the government declared Winter Hollow a protected community. A sanctuary. A place exempt from mining claims and shielded by federal oversight. Miriam approached Ethan with a signed document. "Samuel wanted you to have stewardship rights. This valley is yours to protect." Ethan accepted the papers with a quiet nod. That night, as the Winter Lantern Festival began, strings of warm light swayed between the trees. Music drifted over the snow, soft and nostalgic. Villagers gathered beside crackling fires. Ethan stepped toward the carved wooden memorial board. Ranger followed, brushing gently against his leg. With steady fingers, Ethan pressed the silver coin into the carved groove. Winter Hollow, a place protected so it may protect others. Ranger curled at his feet, breath warm against the cold night. Ethan looked out over the lights, the people, the future unfolding like the glow of lanterns rising toward the stars. He finally knew where he belonged, not because of inheritance, but because of purpose. In the quiet glow of that winter night, as lanterns lifted into the sky and the silver coin shone against carved wood, one truth settled over Winter Hollow like a gentle blessing. Sometimes the smallest things, a single act of courage, a quiet decision, a coin left behind by a loving father, carry a power far greater than we understand. And sometimes, when the road feels too heavy or the storm feels too strong, God opens a path none of us could have seen on our own. Ethan found more than a home. He found a purpose, And maybe that is the closest thing we ever get to a miracle in this life. May this story remind us that every day brings its own small grace, a second chance, a moment of strength, a whisper of hope placed gently in our hands. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need a little light today. Leave a comment below, tell us where you're watching from, and what blessings you are praying for this week. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story of faith, courage, and the quiet miracles that guide us through the hardest seasons. May God bless you, keep you, and watch over your family. In every storm you face, and in every new beginning waiting just beyond it.